I am Chris Finan. I'm president of the American Booksellers Foundation for Free Expression. Your voice, I usually say the bookseller's voice in the fight against censorship, but that's you guys, so your voice in the fight against censorship. And I'm so excited. This is what I'm talking about. This is what, the normal free expression event that I'm associated with, and maybe it has something to do with me, is usually 20 people. And that's if the speaker brings 15 members of his family. So this is very exciting, and it's being filmed so that booksellers everywhere can see it, and actually that people everywhere can see it. And that's a big step up for us. So this is a red letter day for ABFE, and it's good to see all of you out there. We're here today to talk about the shocking fact that book censorship is an everyday problem in America. This is something that as Americans we find it very hard to get our heads around. We have a First Amendment, we have a lot of lawyers. It seems that anything goes in any of the other media, and that perhaps books are not as important or as targeted as they used to be. And the fact is that they are. The only actual tally we have of banned and challenged books comes from the American Library Association, reported mostly by their members. And last year, the last year we have statistics for is 2011, there were 326 challenges, almost one for every day. And those are only the challenges that we know about, which are probably only a fraction of the censorship incidents out there, because we have no way of counting, for example, when a principal goes to a librarian in a school and says, pull that book. There's no paper trail. There's no way for us to know. We do have some statistics about from isolated spots. The Texas ACLU does a very good job of counting challenges. And in Texas last year, there were 17 outright bannings. So that's, now you might think in a state the size of Texas, that's not a lot, but that's a lot of books that kids aren't being allowed to read. And then interestingly, there was just a new study in Missouri, where we are sitting, done by a journalism professor who issued Freedom of Information Act requests to every school district in the state, and got results from almost all of them. And it was a disturbing statistic that from beginning in 2008, there had been at least 30 bans and restrictions imposed. So about 40% of the challenges resulted in some kind of restriction. We have a book censorship problem in this country. And of course, all kinds of books get banned. Children's books, children's picture books get banned. And the best example, my favorite example from last year, if you can have a favorite in this area, is The Naked Cowboy, a book by Amy Timberlake with art by Adam Rex. And Adam worked very assiduously to make sure that this story about a cowboy taking his annual bath did not display anything that would be shocking to anybody, and he used boots and clouds of dust and all kinds of obstacles, to protect the privacy of the cowboy. And nevertheless, the book was challenged in Pennsylvania, and despite the fact that there was an outpouring of support in the community for the book, it was banned. As one critic said, it was pornography. And of course, the more famous children's picture books, And Tango Makes Three, which all of you know, was on the top of the challenge list for several years. And then Harry Potter, who I miss desperately. It's not often you get a hero like Harry Potter to rally around in the censorship area. But so children's books, classics are still banned. On that 2000 list, we had, what did we have? We had Brave New World, that brand new book, that has probably been banned every year. And then, of course, in honor of its anniversary, To Kill a Mockingbird was on the list again. But we're here really today to talk about YA books, books for teens, kids 12 to 18, and the growing number of challenges to those books. And this hostility toward contemporary YA books was really best represented in 2011 by a column in the Wall Street Journal by their children's book critic, Megan Cox-Gurdon. You don't know, I expected some hissing there. In which she launched a completely over-the-top attack on YA, contemporary YA books, and of which this is an example. If books show us the world, teen fiction can be like a hall of funhouse mirrors, constantly reflecting back hideously distorted portrayals of what life is. There are, of course, exceptions, but a careless young reader, or one who seeks out depravity, that would have been me, will find himself surrounded by images not of joy or beauty, but of damage, brutality, and losses of the most horrendous kinds. It was not a temperate criticism at all. It was completely over the top. And she went on to say that contemporary YA literature is guilty of encouraging aberrant behavior because it spreads knowledge of the things that kids are doing to harm themselves. And she then took a kind of a swing at us as well, saying that people who complain about censorship really don't care about kids. So, as you can imagine, of the people sitting up on this dais, blood boiled pretty hotly in response to this column. And I think we're very fortunate to have three of the leading figures in the debate over book censorship. Laurie Halse Anderson has had two books challenged, Speak and Twisted. Sherman Alexie hit number 5 on the most challenged list in 2011. Actually, it slipped a little from the previous year, but and we also have up one of our favorite, my favorite board members, Mitchell Kaplan of Books and Books in Miami, who is a veteran of many free speech fights, and he's faced down FBI subpoenas for customer information. He got ABFI to file an amicus brief against the Miami School Board when they banned a book called Vamos a Cuba because the school board thought it was too favorable a portrayal of Cuba. And most recently, he caught holy hell for having an author reading by Jose Baez, the attorney for Casey Anthony, and we were on the phone quite a bit that week as he took complaints, threats, and all of it in stride, and the event came off fine. So let's get right to it, and we're going to leave lots of time, I hope, for questions. And but I want to start with Laurie and ask, who is challenging these books?
The first word that comes to mind isn't a very polite one. Would no doubt be censored. In my experience, most challenges come from good-hearted people, often parents whose oldest child is just entering adolescence. Because once they've had a kid go through adolescence, they're like, oh, geez, give them the book. Because we have to talk about these things somehow. And when you were reading that quote from the woman from the Wall Street Journal, I was thinking that she must have a 9-year-old. Because when your oldest child is 9, that's often a real precious age if your family is blessed with you have your stuff together. And you think, oh, how can I talk to this kid about all these other things? You know, because, and that's the other piece. I think that when I see censorship attempts, I see adults who are absolutely terrified. They're afraid not only for their child, because the world is a big, scary place, they're afraid that because they know they don't know how to talk about these things. I bet you Megan had some really painful things happen to her in high school that she still hasn't dealt with. And the thought of having to talk to her lovely 9-year-old about that paralyzes her. So how much easier is it just to demonize an entire genre of literature, and we just won't talk about this? That's most of the people. And I have a fair amount of patience with those people, because if you can have a conversation with them, sometimes you can make gains. The people I don't have patience with, and the people that I'm very happy to go toe-to-toe with, are the manipulative political people. And by political, I do mean religious, who have serious agendas and desperately want to take over our country. And one of the ways they take over our country is to manipulate good-hearted people who have understandable anxieties about their children. And they get those people to take over school boards, and then they dictate the agenda of what's going to be American and what people are allowed to think and what people are allowed to say. And those sons of bitches need to go.
Sherman, how do you respond to the Gurdon type of critique that says, that YA books are normalizing aberrant behavior?
Well, I actually wrote a response. The Wall Street Journal contacted me and asked me, and my first draft just said, "Fuck you," and but then they wanted more. They wanted metaphors for that. It's I'm really happy actually that that books are still so dangerous to some people in this age of complete cultural free-for-all on the internet, that they think something as old-fashioned and primitive as dead trees with ink on them is so dangerous. So I'm heartened by that actually, but I'm not nearly as diplomatic as Lori is, even when I'm not even close.
We're a good team.
I'm not diplomatic whatsoever. I've been in principals' offices at schools, and and they're using their, psychology 101 trying to manipulate me, and doesn't work. And the book banners are, by and large, I shouldn't even say that. They're almost exclusively white Christian conservatives. And they're not so much trying to ban subject matter as they're trying to ban liberalism. They're trying to ban brown people. And as Lori talked about, it's part of a huge political agenda. But it's also a sign of some sort of emotional mental illness. People, they make up shit.
They do.
A parent in Georgia said my book contained blowjob lessons. I'm way too shy to write that. So, does it? Yeah. And, I can't even make those suggestions to my wife. And I just sort of gesture. And and I wonder why I get banned. But, and then a woman in, I think it was South Carolina, one of the Carolinas, who said the main characters, Rowdy and Junior, run around grabbing women's breasts. So, and then it was so funny, they called him, in every article they called him former Eagle Scout in Oregon who led the effort to ban. But every article had Eagle Scout troop leader.
Right.
And I always wanted to write back, Indian or pickup basketball player, as if the Boy Scouts lead us in tolerance and acceptance. So, and he had all this imaginary stuff going on. So by and large, they don't even read the books. and it ends up being this innuendo, myth, rumor. It ends up, it's the first step towards Salem witch trials. And I know a lot of people who don't think it's a big deal, but the first step, you have to fight it at the root. And I just know there are kids like all of us out there when you were 13 or 14 who needed those books. And the amazing part is YA is so amazingly healthy right now. And so, it's pretty much all I read now because of plot. And in a sense, clearly defined moral missions. I think YA is actually incredibly moral. And it has a very specific political, social focus. And I'm happy when my books get banned. It means they're valuable in that town, and every kid will read it.
Well, one of the most heartening story, or most encouraging story I've heard with respect to absolutely true story, a banning, was in Richland, Washington.
Yeah.
Were you aware of that one?
Yeah.
Where the school board banned the book, and then there was such a hullabaloo about it in the community that 2 of the school board members decided that they would take the radical step of reading it. And they read it, and they reversed their vote and put the book back. And they said funny things. They said some really encouraging things. One said, "I'll never vote to ban a book again before I've read it." And the others said, "I never really thought about it, but when you take a book out of a classroom, you deprive all the other, you affect the First Amendment rights of the parents of all the other kids, and the kids and their parents. And I never thought about it from that point of view. So we are engaged in a conversation here, and we do have moments of progress.
Can I add one thing?
Yeah, sure.
Actually, I'm going to add 2. Missouri has been the heartland of many, many book challenges in the last couple of years. And in 2009, there's a gentleman, I use that term loosely, who was very successful in having Slaughterhouse-Five speak, and what was the other one, Sarah Ockler's book? 50 Boys Summer? Something like that, right. Removed from their school. And this man's agenda affected every area of curriculum, not just reading and literature. And what was fascinating, and I'm thinking always about what can you do as a bookseller? What's your part of this equation? And this guy wrote an editorial for the local newspaper in which he pulled quotes or paraphrased all these books in questions. And just like Sherman gave the examples of with Speak, he was completely making stuff up. This is fascism. Bullying is a baby fascism, and this anger, it has so much energy behind it that people who are not in that frame of mind tend to recoil a little bit, because who wants to deal with that, right? It's hard, it breaks your heart, you get dirty. But when I saw that the absolute misstatements about that, and this is something you can absolutely do in your own community, is to call people out who are making these challenges and ask them to be specific. Because then that gives you the opportunity to respond, or other readers in your community to respond in a public forum about where they're wrong. And I disagree with you about one point. I don't think it's just the white evangelicals, because my book Winter Girls was trounced by people on the New York Times blog The Well, which was pretty much left-wing people who thought that the book was bad because it was going to give kids ideas about eating disorders. So it's interesting. Most people have a topic that's their sensitive topic. They're kind of ouchy about it, and they're not sure their kid is old enough to read about it, which usually means their kid is. Usually means their kid started reading about it a year ago and is desperate to talk to their parents or somebody that they can trust.
Mitchell, I wanted to bring this back to booksellers for a minute. And one of the scenario that Mrs. Gurdon opens with her book with is, or her article, is of a parent standing in a Barnes & Noble, somebody she knew.
That was the first problem.
saying that as she looked around, all she saw were books about vampires and, you know, disgusting books that she couldn't possibly, give to her 13-year-old daughter. And I wonder, first of all, are you getting many complaints in stores about YA books? And how do you handle them if you do?
Well, I first want to say that I'm probably the luckiest bookseller around to be surrounded by Laurie and Sherman, two of my favorite people, and I'm sure two of all of your favorite folks as well. And you just hear how articulate they are, and we are so fortunate to have them as spokespeople on our behalf, selling books. I should say, to be specific to your question, it's really interesting. I believe that we have one of the really great kids programs in bookstores around, and it really, I have to give a shout out. I probably shouldn't be the one up here, but our Becky, who's over here, is a remarkable kids bookseller. And one of the things that Becky did when she took over our kids department is she literally moved the YA section completely out of the kids room and put it right next to the history section. It's like one of the most prime spots that we have in the bookshop. And I can tell you that to add to what they're saying, I don't know, and you during the Q&A you'll let us know, and Becky will also let us know. I don't know that on the in-store level there's that big of a problem. We don't really get our customers complaining to us very much about what this woman wrote about in the Wall Street Journal. I think where we need to be so strong is fighting those people with the political agendas, because that can affect us ultimately if people start banning things, and if that dialogue gets to a point where we have state-sponsored censorship to some extent. Where I have found it is at certain times when we brought authors into the schools. We will find that I'll get an email from a parent at a school saying, how come you're bringing people only with one political agenda to the school? Or how come you bring, why are we discussing X, Y, or Z issue at this school? It shouldn't happen, we shouldn't be discussing that. Those are people who typically haven't read the book. And what I do, as we do as booksellers in general, is I try to use it as an educating sort of experience. So I basically educate that person as to, first of all, you're wrong. You haven't read the book. Here's X, Y, and Z authors who have come in from another political agenda, and that, it's also okay for someone to hear something way out of the box as well if you're a kid. We all remember being 15-year-olds and 14-year-olds, and that's what you're supposed to do when you're 14 and 15-year-old. You're supposed to explore the margins if you can. And also you want to be able to read things that relate to you. So I think the word educate always comes to mind when I deal with those people. But like Sherman, when I think someone is manipulating, like Sherman and like Laurie, when someone is manipulating the facts for their own political gain, that's when you need to really, really be tough and fight back. And that happened with our Vamos a Cuba as well. That became a political fight. It was only about politics. The book was innocuous. The book didn't take one political stance or another. And what happened was there was a guy on the school board who was wanting to further his career. And so I believe he kind of sparked the incident with a friend of his at a particular school to get this book pulled from the library. We carried the book both in English and in Spanish, and we never really had any complaints about it. Unfortunately, I immediately called up Chris, and we got the ACLU involved in the state of Florida. It's one that we didn't win, I don't believe. But the school board, because of the fight and because of the pushback, has not tried to ban any other books, since then. So that's kind of what I would say about all of that.
You know, we hear a lot from defenders of, you know, the people making challenges that this isn't about censorship at all, especially around Banned Books Week time. There are people out there who say there are no banned books. These are just parents exercising their rights as parents to decide what their kids will and won't read. So this is not a there really isn't a censorship issue. And I wonder how you guys respond to that argument that, you know, this isn't about censorship. This is about parental choice.
Well, you know, it's not about, I mean, it's when they try, because there's always an alternate book. There's always an option to not read the book. And I have no quarrel with a parent who doesn't want their kid to read a particular book. I have kids, and I also have limits. Mine are incredibly large, you know. But that's always funny when I'm in these disagreements with people, or arguments, and do you let your kids read your books? They don't want to. So, do you talk to your kids this way? Yeah. I mean, yeah. But they try to control what every kid reads, and they really want to control what gets published. And you know, it's an old argument, but it's true. You know, my books don't nearly contain as much sex and violence as the Bible. You know, there's no genocide in my books. Well, it's mentioned, but you know, no children are beheaded by soldiers. You know, so you know, Song of Solomon. You know, I've never written anything that horny. So there's naked people everywhere, and so there's just general level of hypocrisy, and the ironic thing about all of it is that this book, and when I start pointing out particular passages, this book actually celebrates small town Christian conservatives. My book celebrates them because I went from a reservation school to a white farm town, very conservative, very Christian, and it saved me. And it always amazes me that they can't even see how much it celebrates them. And I was a commie from day one, so I was also a commie there. I'm a commie now, and I was a few years ago, I was the parade marshal for the Mule Days Parade in Reardon. I was president of the Future Farmers of America when I was there. And for me, I mean, I grew up with their kids, and they were doing the same stuff this commie boy was. They were in the same haylofts. You know, they were in the same wheat fields, and you know, and I get angry at them, and I'll tell them, right now your kid is somewhere trying to have sex. They don't like to hear that.
I think that's a new button we're going to use in our kids section. I think that would really be. I like that.
Well, Lori, do you, when you talk to parents, do you have any success in getting them to understand that, you know, the implications of what they're doing when they try when they challenge a book?
Actually, I had the opportunity to be in the Middle East in November, and I was in the country of Qatar, Doha, Qatar, which sometimes in the States is pronounced Qatar, Qatar. And many parents at the American school I was speaking were very conservative Muslims, and they also had a large Mormon population there for reasons I still haven't figured out. And so I was primarily there to talk about my historical novels to middle school. But some parents were a little uncomfortable with my presence, and I thought the librarians handled it very well in that we had an open session for a parents meeting with just me and the parents, and I got to speak to them directly about why I think it's important that teenagers have access to YA literature. And there were a number of Muslim women in the room who were completely veiled, which was the first time that had ever happened to me. So I was like, you know, I'm a guest in their country, you know, trying to be respectful of a country that I'm not familiar with, a religion that I don't know that much about, but this is my truth, this is my, you know, so I have to be honest about that. And so the way I presented it, after I explained a little bit about who I was was I talked about how, as parents, we all do a pretty good job most of the time teaching our children not to cross the road without looking both ways. You know, and just about that, kind of those basic safety things that you start drilling into your kid even before they understand what you're saying. Because that's your job as a parent, you know, is to try as hard as you can to make sure that you can't protect them. You're not always going to be there. You know that. That's why you have to teach them on their own to look both ways before they cross the road. And that adolescence can be a minefield, and there's more and more opportunities for them to be out of your sight. And they more and more have to learn how to understand a situation and make decisions for themselves within a situation. And the safest way to present those situations to them in a way they'll understand is in literature. There's actually science about this. It has to do with mirror neurons. You know, and when the mirror neurons in your brain read a passage that they understand, because they've had that experience, well, there's a communication between the different parts of your brain that, oh, this is the road crossing time. I would look both ways if I was in this situation. And the same thing happens when kids read books that have meaning for them. And so I just kind of went on for about an hour. You don't want me to give you the whole speech. And towards the end, one of the women, her eyes were unveiled, and she puddled up. And she alluded to a situation that she was familiar with. I'm pretty sure she was talking about herself, but she wasn't going to do that in a room full of people. And she said, you know, our children, I thought I was keeping my children safe by not telling them about these things. And now I realize that I'm making them, I'm opening the door for them to be hurt. So I guess I kind of went off track there, but that was such a meaningful moment for me to watch this grown woman who was very convicted walking in the door about what she felt was her role as a mother and what she felt was actually moral and immoral, and that she had the grace to listen and to grow a little bit, and I was very moved by that. So those opportunities are there, not all of them. But that's why I think we do a really good cop, bad cop routine in a principal's office. So when you have the opportunities in your community to have conversations, you will open some hearts.
I wanted to ask you guys about self-censorship and the danger that could, because Gurdon makes it sound like, you know, the sluice gates are open, it's a dive for the bottom, you know, and you know, the real danger here comes from, you know, not enough self-censorship. Do you think, you know, that there is a danger of self-censorship in publishing today?
We should probably ask, we don't have any editors in the room. You know, I'm just thinking about when I write, I try to censor the things that are boring. You know, I call that critical thinking. Well, I used to say that if a kid can see it on a Law and Order rerun at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I'll write about it. And that's another thing I'll use when people bitch at me about the topics of my books. I'll say, does your school library have newspapers? Oh, really? Then do you think maybe they've heard about these things before? You know, is that in the news? Are we discussing the cardinal in Scotland who just resigned because he's been accused of having sex with people that he's not supposed to be having sex with? Golly, he's not supposed to be having sex with anybody. And this is all over the news. Oh, look, it's that word, sex. People have bodies. So no, I'm not going to do that. But I also think it's important as an artist to not be drawn to topics just because, you know, ooh, it's going to upset people. Because if that's the reason that you're choosing a topic, I don't think you're going to do a great job. I think as an artist, you have to, the stories find us, you know, and for visual artists too. And you have to remain, you have to kind of, I work really hard at shutting all that stuff out. That's why I live in the boondocks, so that I can hear clearly what I'm supposed to be working on and not worry about, if you worry about audience, I think you're screwed.
I can make my editors and publicists very nervous. And I often think they'd rather I behaved in a certain way, but my editor, who moved on, damn her, Jennifer Hunt is black and grew up in the West, often the only black kid in the whole school. So she and I were really simpatico about the subject matter of the book. And in fact, she pushed me to go farther. And so, I don't know that a white editor would have done that. I think a white editor would have been far more terrified of some of the subject matter, especially because it's publishing and, it's a lot of liberals who are terrified. And, but not a black liberal. So it was an Indian liberal and a black liberal working on a book together. And now I'm going to have an Asian liberal. And so it's going to be okay. But, frankly speaking, for various cultural reasons, I think publishing gets scared because it is white liberals. Sorry, white liberals. But you're scared. I scare you. You laugh and get all happy, but you wouldn't want to live with it. And but on a practical advice too, Chris Crutcher, I learned this from Chris Crutcher, who also gets banned constantly. Whenever he hears about a banning, he sends a box of books to the nearest library, which I do now. So something very practical. Bookstores can do that kind of thing as well. Celebrate whatever banning you're near, celebrate that book. An active response.
Well, that's a great point for me to transition, because I wanted a couple more questions, and then we're gonna let everybody else talk. First of all, who are our allies in this fight? Sometimes we feel isolated and alone. Who are the people that you find are helping, are rallying to your cause the quickest?
When the big Missouri Speak banning happened in 2009, I was extremely proud of what we like to call Uncle Penguin at my house, because Penguin Books took out a full-page ad in the New York Times, which was very kind and gracious. And let me tell you something, that full-page ad had a huge impact. When I first heard that they were going to do that, I was thinking, okay, give me that budget, because I have other places I'd rather you used it. But it was the right decision, because that was a statement, a very loud statement that I was very grateful for. I think that if you hear of a banning situation, you should always contact the author. Authors respond to these things differently. When I find out about them, I tend to contact the librarian or teacher privately, because sometimes their job is on the line, and I don't want to go wading into something until I find out the facts of the situation. And I do believe that, communities have professionals that are hired based on their expertise. They're called English teachers and librarians who are, know way more about this stuff than I do even. But if you're looking for some background, always contact the authors and go through the publishers too. Don't trust that if you contact the publisher, that the publisher will necessarily follow through and contact the author. Go ahead and contact the author directly.
Well, I would just say, as a bookseller, we're really fortunate to have a number of organizations that we work with that we can rely on. But before I talk about that, I just want to talk a little bit about this notion of fear. And I think that fear can be extremely debilitating. And we have to get beyond the fear. We have to not fear story anymore. There's nothing to fear about stories. Stories are out there. There are millions of stories. And we have to, it resonates with me what Sherman said about liberals. I mean, I remember the time when liberals wouldn't even call themselves liberals. They were frightened to call themselves a liberal. They were frightened to take a stand. And I think that when you do take a stand, and we've taken a couple of stands, as Chris has mentioned, when you do take a stand, you find that there are a million natural allies for you out there that you really didn't realize were your allies, and that more people believe in the right to be able to read whatever you want than don't believe in that. It's these very bullying kinds of loud figures that hog the media often and generate that kind of fear, and it shuts a lot of people up. And I think we just have to get beyond that fear. With that said, I think we also, as booksellers, have to really support the Kids Right to Read project. We all know about that. I hope you'll see there's a brochure on your table. Whenever you hear of a challenge, make sure you report that local challenge to the Kids Right to Read project. I think you should, as Lori says, tell teachers and librarians about the Kids Right to Read project so they can reach out to them if there are any issues that impinge on them. I also think that we have a great tradition, and that is the Banned Books Week. And I think we need to find ways of utilizing that to its best and fullest potential. I just realized that it's coming up to the 30th anniversary.
No, we're past 30.
We're past 30.
Yeah, I
What are
think
we-
we're at 32 this year.
32 for the Banned Books Week, and I think we can use that, in our stores and in our communities even better than we do, and try to work on that. For me, and being on the board, and for you guys, I think you have to make sure you join ABFE. You really have to. I'm not going to embarrass everybody and say how many are ABFE members, but if you're not, you really ought to be. And I also think that if you're a publisher sitting in the room, I think you can find a small part of your budget to make sure that ABFE gets funded and doesn't have to struggle each year to find its funding. We thank the ABA for helping with the funding, but the ABA is not the only place where we get our funding from. We have started an affiliate program with ABFE, meaning that if you buy certain, particularly sidelines, those sideline providers have agreed to give a percentage of their sales back to ABFE. We just did a big thing with Lamy and Filofax. They've agreed to give 5% of all their wholesale business from our from indie stores back to ABFE. That's 5%. That could be
Filofax?
Filofax and
I'm gonna go buy
and
some
Lamy
Filofax.
pens, right? And if you buy them through an indie store, they will donate 5% back. That could be a significant way of supporting ABFE.
Well, great. Mitchell's done. He's given the ABFE commercial, so I don't have to. I can be I can be objective in it. But I think it's time to take questions. So.
I actually have a question that I was asked to submit.
Go right ahead.
Because Heather from Children's Book World in Haverford, Pennsylvania had to go home. So this is for you. She had a situation, and she'd never had it before, where she arranged to bring an author to a high school just to do kind of the author thing. They weren't reading the author's book in class necessarily, but whatever, it's what you do. And then she was contacted by the principal who said, well, you can still bring her, but you're not allowed to sell her books here. So what do you do in that situation?
Boy, what's that? Yeah, well, that is a situation that we would do. We would certainly not have that author be involved in that situation. And depending on your relationship with the school, you might want to also embarrass the school and put out something that happened at that school, using it as an educating purpose. And probably tell that school that you won't work with them again, under those circumstances. We had a similar, with an adult author, with the Miami Book Fair. We used this church to present authors. And one year we had Anne Rice at the church. And, if you've ever had Anne Rice, you know that her readers come dressed up.
Yeah.
And there happened to be a deacon from this church in the audience that night to hear Anne Rice. And so that church said that from now on, if we ever wanted to have an author at that church, they would have to get pre-screen what the author was to say. And so we said, look, you'll never have another author in this church again. So, we just stopped using that church. And I think that really would resonate with the school, particularly principal. But again, it would be back to educating. And I throw it out to you, since we're in Q&A.
I'd still go, and then I would take over the assembly.
There, well, if we had Sherman, we would have Sherman do that.
Yeah.
And engage the principal in this.
Right there in front of the school.
Yeah, well,
and it's
that's-
happened a couple times.
that's actually
And in the
really
reception
important.
afterwards, the kids who came in to talk to me were, of course, not, them. It was the goth kids. It was the Anne Rice fans. It was the chess club.
Yeah.
It was all the marginalized kids in the school. So when you go into that environment, I mean, all I can think about is how much particular hell they must be getting in that school because of their differences.
Yeah.
So I go into those schools happily because it empowers them.
Yeah.
I mean, and to go in and tell them, you're going to be the interesting ones.
Yeah.
I had never dealt with the librarian world so directly before as an adult author. And what I found, there are two kinds of librarians. There are the tour guides who, whatever journey you decide to go on, they're going to get in the boat with you and show the way or point out alternate channels, to belabor the metaphor. And then there are gatekeepers. And I've been on panels and I've been with the gatekeepers who still think everybody should be studying To Kill a Mockingbird instead of Walter Dean Myers, for one example, who really want to locate, they remind me of, old bearded English professors who can, it's the only job where you can remain completely mired in the past and still have a job. And there's all sorts of librarians like that. And so, yeah, you end up fighting a librarian, which is, number one, is really easy to win. Number two is really disheartening and can be very demoralizing. I'm funny about this, but, there's many times when you run into this and you feel powerless and really depressed about it. And librarians really get me when a librarian behaves in this manner, especially because I go back to all the librarians in my life who were amazing, and I think of the destruction a librarian like that can cause is far greater than any idiot parent can, and inside a school. So in my head, I just thought, Dante has a new circle for librarians like that.
It's interesting. When I hear him speak like that, I also think of presenting both these authors in front of 500 kids who are just enthralled, who just love the fact that they're going to be able to read it. The censorship, the issues are the furthest thing from their minds, and we idiotic adults try to impose our own kind of weird anxieties onto these kids who are it's the freshest, most innocent way of approaching a story. And it's a shame that we're having to sit in this room and even talk about these things. And we have to get that word out about that it's really about the kid. What you said, you have no choice. This kid wants to read that story, let them read that story.
I just thought of another opportunity for you and your community. I have this line I try to bring up as often as possible, and that's, happy kids don't cut themselves. Happy kids don't drink themselves into oblivion. Happy kids don't bully other kids. And so when we look at the behaviors that terrify adults, and because they're so harmful, you have to understand that there's a kid in there who really needs some love and support and somebody to listen to and some examples of how to get through whatever shit they've been handed. But when you have in your community, this happens, stuff is happening all over the place. I do think there's a role for the bookseller as well as the librarian and please God, the teachers, to make sure that, that your community is aware of the books out there that could be supportive for these kids who are struggling. Because Sherman gets the letters too. We all get them. If you write YA literature that is literature that has meaning, has heart, you get letters from kids that just say, "Oh, thanks, I'm not dead, because I read your book." you know, and you only need one of those before you start going, wow, what's happening? And then you get 100, you know. And so that's, and I wish that there was a way to share this more with you, for you to understand that, you know, there's the reader and then there's the author, but you're the hinge, you're the spine of the book that brings them together. You have a critical role there. And so whenever you have the opportunities, please grab them with strength and glory, you know, run with it.
And along those lines, I think general bookselling kicks in. You know, you speak to the kid, you say, what have you read last? What do you like? You know, well, maybe this isn't for you, but here's something else, or maybe you will like it. You know, you just sort of do your general bookselling thing, even though she or he is 9 years old, you know, trying to find stuff.
If a 9-year-old kid picked up my book, they're pretty advanced. I was a 9-year-old kid reading everything, so it really depends on the kid.
Right.
And, you know, you trying to do that is, I mean, it really is a form of what we're trying to fight against. And would you stop a liberal from reading a conservative book? Or a conservative from reading a liberal book?
Yeah.
Well, your backlash is your job.
Yes.
The thing I said to the principal that really got him was, for them to react that way, they must be hearing that word here in a whole different context. And the book has been challenged for that reason, particularly that joke. For those of you who don't know it, I'll say it, and I'll use the word. And it's a joke I heard growing up constantly, and it's a joke Jennifer, my black editor, heard in the West. You know, that Indians are living proof that niggers fuck buffalo. You know, the worst, most insult. I think it's the worst insult of all time. But the thing is, immediately afterwards, the kid who says it gets punched in the face and gets his nose bloodied. I think that's a pretty, you know, violent but moral reaction. And nobody ever talks about what happens in the immediate aftermath. And my narrator goes on and on about how racist and horrible and destructive and terrifying this is. You know, banning and censorship happens a lot because people don't know how to read.
If I just add to that, because I think that's it. It's people get upset about the word or the act or whatever. Young adult literature is about, it's the whole moral arc. It's the consequences. And you can't talk about the consequences unless you discuss the behavior. Right? And you know, my dad's a minister, and so I come from this, it was, you know, the Bible, it's all, you know, it's that, the whole thing, I was fed it daily as a child. You know, and Jesus didn't say just don't. You know, if you just say, you know, the Old Testament said don't, and that didn't work out well. You know, you just say don't, and then, especially with adolescents, you get nowhere. But if you show the behavior, and then you show the consequences, then the maturing mind goes, oh, right? Say that word. And hopefully somebody will beat the crap out of you. And other people will see that, and you'll understand that you've hurt someone. And that's a hurtful thing to say to somebody. And now let's talk about that. Let's talk about the history of that. Let's talk about why we're even having that discussion, because of where our country is. It's the consequences.
Yes.
To go quickly, to go back to liberals,
Yeah.
as you talked about, you know, he also gets called faggot in the book. And he turns it around and says, you know, well, if it means that I'm this kind or this sensitive or this interesting, then I'm a happy faggot. But I got a letter from a young 23-year-old lesbian who, and then she blogged it, that you don't use that word ever. Not realizing that she was guilty of the same thing.
Right.
She hates.
Yeah.
It's a really fear again. And if we're not, these kids experience this stuff all the time.
Yeah, that's just it. And that's why it's so important that they feel, and in a community, you're a store. can become a safe place for children. Libraries are absolutely sanctuaries. And hopefully the kids are in schools that have libraries. But they should know that your bookstore is a safe place too. It's a safe place for people to have ideas. And one of the greatest things about this country, although we keep screwing it up, we're limping towards the day when all people will feel like they are safe enough and powerful enough to have ideas, and they can talk about them with people who disagree with them without being shut down.
Which also means that we have to fight for those things, as distasteful as they are, to not allow anything to be banned, even those things that might be distasteful to
Right.
us,
Right.
even those things that we
O'Reilly.
really don't want, like like O'Reilly. I mean, early on as a bookseller, I remember, we carried Mein Kampf, and I remember, people coming into the store saying, "Why are you carrying that?" And but we're not a governmental agency. We have choices. We can carry what we want to carry and not carry what we don't want to carry. But we have to fight for those things as well when you defend the First Amendment.
The Coeur d'Alene Indian Reservation. My father's was Coeur d'Alene. I'm half Coeur d'Alene. So the school on the res banned, this was really early on, banned my books, which was awesome. Because inside whatever community, and especially the one I'm most familiar with, just because they're brown skin doesn't mean they're not monsters. So I was happy, because I knew the kids were reading the books anyway. So, and their parents, once again, just made it even more attractive. But that surprised me, and it really hurt my feelings on one hand, but also delighted me. With this bannings, the thing is, I don't write. I got lucky. I sell copies, but I don't write to do that. But it's an insecure job, no matter where you're at. So, and those writers who say they don't read their reviews, they're lying. They're lying because they're afraid to be vulnerable in front of you. But every time a book gets banned, it hurts. And when your own tribe does it, it's devastating. And so, I don't even know if it's still banned. This was in 1995. So, and the thing that happens though is that fame has a big way of making people forget they need to ban the books. And by and large, most people are also afraid of Indians, of creating trouble for Indians. They don't want to be Custer, and so I have that luxury. For Lori, the way gender politics work, they have a much easier time battering a woman author than they do a man, and a brown man at that.
Becoming a postmenopausal bitch has changed that. It's really nice.
Well, that's
I
worked for
can't
me.
imagine
Yeah.
anybody. I can't imagine anybody battering Lori. I'd
Not
like
anymore.
to see him try.
Not anymore. Just real quickly, when the New York Times blogged The Well, and hundreds of people wrote in saying that I was a terrible person for creating an entire generation of eating disorders, and I was completely unprepared for that. I shouldn't have been, but I just blew me out of the water. And it showed me that everybody has a button. Everybody has a something about culture or children that they're sensitive about, because they don't know how to talk about it to children, or they have their own past. And when somebody writes a book that pushes that button, that person is going to be sometimes, just like really loud and bullying and condemning, or they just will carefully make sure that kids can't see it. So that was an interesting experience. And even with it, I'm sure your librarian, everybody's got those buttons. What has been very effective to me is to say, do you have newspapers in your library? Because your newspapers will carry news reporting about sexual activity that middle schoolers do, sometimes voluntary, sometimes coerced. It's a conversation. The conversation is, why is this making you uncomfortable? You ask that person, why are you uncomfortable with this? You know, you don't think it's appropriate for 13-year-olds and 14-year-olds to have any kind of sexual intimacy? Okay. At what age do you start talking to teenagers about sexual intimacy? At what time do you think people start wanting to reach out and touch other people? 18? 25? You know, it's and in my writing experience, and everybody I know, well, I can't speak for you, but I've never had an editor say, take it out, ever. It's not done. I mean, well, I don't know. I suspect they wouldn't be my editor, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't know, what do you think?
You know, I almost didn't come on this panel because it just pisses me off. And I get mad, and then I walk around grumpy for a bit, as if I don't already. But people don't notice. If you're funny, they don't notice how angry you are.
Bitter.
Yeah, they think, oh, he's so funny. Funny, like Richard Pryor funny.
Right.
Setting myself on fire freebasing. But,
Don't do that.
yeah, but it's one of the great, he did it on stage, and he lit a match, and he goes, I know what you fuckers are doing. What is this? It's Richard Pryor running. And awesome. I don't know. I mean, I'm at that point now where I don't know.
I know that Chris Crutcher, when he wrote his first book, which was a long time ago now, and he didn't know anything about this world, why world really kind of Chris sort of invented it. And so he dropped the F-bomb like every other word, because that's what kids do, right? And he submitted it to his editor, who pointed out that, that even though that happens in conversation, that's not great writing. And the reason that I don't have my characters curse every other word is it's boring, and it takes up too much space on the page. So when somebody swears in my books, you'll generally see there's a reason. Something has escalated a little bit where a curse word is appropriate. And I think that's another way to look at this. If you're describing, if the story requires that there be a sexual contact between two girls, then that's what has to be shown. It's life. It's life, and it's. I think our generation, maybe younger generations, are a little bit smarter, but we're so screwed up about sex. That Puritan legacy is just dog in us, and we put it. I just have such respect for teenagers because we've created this culture in which they're swimming in it. It's everywhere. If you have a son who has the internet, oh man. Right?
If you have a husband.
Really? But they're surrounded by adults who are all pretending. Talk about the emperor not wearing any clothes and having his own XXX site. Where they're surrounded by adults who can't bring themselves to talk about this stuff that these kids are seeing constantly. And I tell parents, conservative parents, who are doing a great job within their own framework of raising their children with their values and their moral code. And they know the rules, they abide by them, they've got a loving, strong family. I said, that's awesome. How do you guarantee that your children are never going to come in contact with kids who are not like them? And then they're never going to come across situations where they get in above their head. If you don't tell them what's happening in the world, you are failing as a parent.
Do you tell them you're failing as a parent?
Yes.
Awesome.
I'm sorry to say it's 11:45. I really am sorry, but I'm loving the. All right.
Approval of any sort of fundamentalism, whether it's left or right. I was far more fundamental in my racial politics before 9/11, and the end game of tribalism is flying planes into buildings. So, in any form whatsoever, it's maybe especially when it's people I generally agree with, I share politics with, when they behave in fundamentalist ways, that really pisses me off. And especially Indians, my group. Their homophobia pisses me off. So Indian conservatism is my hot button, especially when it's described as disguised as liberalism.
Yeah, no, that's a similar hot button that I have, and also building on that, I think going through a period that we've been going through for a long time of just intellectual dishonesty, just not being real, being manipulative, using things like we're talking about now for hidden agendas. All you got to do is watch what goes on in our politics, where there is not a serious discourse. Years ago, a guy named Neil Postman wrote a book that has resonated with me for years and years and years, called "Amusing Ourselves to Death." The subtitle is "Serious Discourse in the Age of Show Business." And to this day, even though he's been dead for a while, that's probably my biggest hot button: manipulating somebody to get what you really want in some way.
I'm a gun owner and a hunter, and I think one of the things that I struggle with, I live in a very rural community, and when I'm discussing guns with other people who are so, in my opinion, narrowly focused on the right to bear arms, I have a hard time sometimes being rational with them, because I feel there's a middle ground. For me, there's a middle ground of responsible, legitimate gun owning, and I do think that there's a lot of things I would like to change in our country that would restrict some gun ownership. And so I'm on both sides of that argument, because then there are people who think, take all the guns away, blah, 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 blah. And you're not gonna take mine. So that's a subject area where I'm uncomfortably in the middle. So I generally get pissed off at everybody because I disagree with them.
I have a lot of them, but the most recent one is my wife and I went to see Zero Dark 30, and my sons, who are adults now, 31 and 26, and the oldest is a Marine who's served in Afghanistan and Iraq, and they didn't go with us. We don't go as a family anymore, but I asked them, what their reaction was to the movie and to the torture controversy, and the answer I got back told me that we've got a discussion ahead about torture.
Yeah.
But the difference, I think, that we're making in this, that free speech advocates always say, is we all have hot buttons. That's why censorship comes from every political angle, and you can never assume it's just one group. The question is how you deal with those feelings, and that you don't. And it's always been the way we've raised our kids. We've exposed them to a lot of stuff that a lot of our friends would never expose their kids to. On the philosophy that you talk, this gives you the opportunity to talk to them about difficult things, and that's the free speech argument, that we talk about things in a democracy. That's what makes us a democracy and what preserves democracy. And thank you all for being here.
Thank
I want to
you.
thank the panel.